Alright, we gotta talk about this place. Fox Hollow Farm. Ever heard of it? It's this eerie, secluded property just outside Indianapolis. Sounds like your average peaceful countryside estate, right? Well, it's got a history so chilling it could make your skin crawl. Stick around to the end to see a creepy news interview that the suspect gave outside of his home before being caught. Back in the 90s, this guy named Herb Baumeister lived there. To the outside world, he seemed like an average, if not eccentric, family man. He owned this successful chain of thrift stores. He had a wife, kids, the whole American dream thing. But behind closed doors, this guy was a straight-up psychopath. So let's set the scene. Fox Hollow Farm is this huge wooded property, 18 acres, with a big stately house. It's got an indoor pool, a carriage house, and this almost too perfect suburban aesthetic for the time. But there was something really off about Herb. His behavior was strange, erratic even, and his marriage, pretty much non-existent. His wife later admitted they hadn't even been intimate in years. But here's where things take a dark turn. Around that time, young men were disappearing from Indianapolis, particularly from the gay community. Guys would go out to bars, never to be seen again. The police were stumped. No bodies, no leads, just missing people, vanishing into thin air. Eventually, one guy survived an encounter. We'll call this survivor Tony to protect his identity. So Tony went to the police and described being taken to this estate where Brian, who was actually Herb, tried to strangle him during a bizarre game. Tony described this bizarre scene upon entering the pool area. There were several life-sized mannequins dressed in formal attire placed around the room. Herb would position them as if though they were attending some kind of high society party. The idea of him committing such acts while being surrounded by these lifeless figures just adds to the layers of creepiness. Tony gave a statement about that night stating that Brian was well-dressed, charismatic, but a little odd. Brian invited Tony back to his house for drinks and a swim. Tony agreed and got into his car. Tony described arriving at a large upscale home with an indoor pool. Brian offered him a drink, and then they talked for a while. As the night progressed, Brian suggested autoerotic asphyxiation. First, Tony did it to Brian, and then Tony agreed to let Brian do it to him with a hose. But at some point, he realized Brian wasn't letting go. Tony fought back at first, then pretended to pass out, at which point Brian released his grip. When Tony sat up, Brian acted as if nothing had happened, smiling and joking. He told Tony that his previous partners had really enjoyed it and that some hadn't been able to handle it. Tony knew something was deeply wrong and suspected that Brian had killed the others this way. He managed to stay calm, make an excuse to leave, and got out of the house safely. Now this one detective, Mary Wilson, started investigating. She kept hearing the same name pop up, Brian Smart. This guy would pick up men at bars, take them back to his place, some fancy house with a pool, and almost none of them ever returned. About a year later, Tony saw Herb at a bar. He asked his friend to get the tags on the car that Herb was driving so he could turn it into the police. But the tags didn't come back to Brian Smart. Instead, they belonged to Herb Baumeister. Police went to the store Herb owned to question him. Herb tried to deny being in that part of town, but he couldn't deny the fact that his car was seen outside a bar and his tags were recorded. Even though his demeanor was off, you can't arrest someone just based on the vibes they give you. So the police had to come up with a game plan. They decided they would talk to Herb's wife, Julie. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Julie told the police she had been married for 25 years and never even saw Herb yell at the kids or even grab her arm during an argument. She told them they must have the wrong guy and refused to let the police search the home or property. One thing Julie left out, though, was that her 15-year-old son had found bones in the yard not too long ago. Julie went out to the woods, saw the bones, and told her husband about them when he got home. Herb gave some excuse that they had belonged to his father when he was a doctor. Because Herb was a borderline hoarder and never got rid of anything, this didn't seem too far-fetched. Julie told Herb to clean them up and never thought about them again. That was until the police came knocking. Of course, she didn't think to mention it at the time. After much thought and deliberation, Julie allowed a search of Fox Hollow Farm.
That's until Detective Wilson got a call from Julie Baumeister's attorney. If anyone at this stage of the game is a victim, I think it would be his wife and his family.
She had a story to share.
Court records show that Juliana Baumeister contacted police through her attorney last Monday and took them to a section of her property where in December of 1994 she had observed possible human remains, including a skull and bones.
What police uncovered was something straight out of a horror movie. Behind the house, near the woods, they found human bones. Not just one, not just two, but dozens. The soil was littered with skeletal remains, so many that they couldn't even get a full count at first. It was like a graveyard hidden in plain sight. They estimated Herb had killed at least 11 men, but some suspected the number was much higher. Julie filed for divorce shortly after, but how could she have not known anything was going on? Well, apparently Julie and the kids went out of town a lot, on the weekends and in the summer, and they went to the family's lake house while Herb stayed behind to tend to the business. It seems that all of Herb's horrific encounters occurred when the family was away. Herb also had strict control over the household and kept parts of their home off limits. Julie later admitted she was never allowed near certain areas of the property, including parts of the backyard where he had buried remains. She never seemed to question her husband about anything, just assumed he was working or stressed. Apparently, Herb and Julie had only been intimate a handful of times during their marriage, which might have led her to be less suspicious of him when he was sneaking out or hiding things from her. Herb Baumeister could easily blend in with society, but many people found him unsettling. Even seeing his picture gives us the creeps. He is the definition of living a double life. A reserved businessman by day and a predatory killer by night, making him especially dangerous. If Tony hadn't come forward and thought to get the license plate number, Herb could have gone on to hurt many more men. Herb, though, he never faced justice. Before they could arrest him, he fled to Canada and took his own life, leaving behind a note which he rambled on about stress and personal failures, but never once mentioned the victims. Total coward move, if you ask us. Here's the bonus news interview of Herb we promised.
The Indiana Department of Transportation maintains over 11,000 miles of roadway, and we paint those miles of roadway each year, and this is just an isolated incident that happened.
The drive-by striping, whatever.
Herb Baumeister of Carmel saw it all.
I said to my son, they're gonna hit that raccoon with a spray gun, and sure enough, they just striped right over its face and neck. Didn't even move it, no effort to, get it out of the way. So I happened to have a Polaroid with me, so I took a shot at the thing.
A raccoon, which met its demise on the yellow line, became one with the paint. The raccoon has since been removed. This is all that's left.
This was just, the painter should have had a chalk line drawn around his career by state officials. There was no excuse for that. The poor thing deserved a better fate than that.
Honestly, did he really care about the raccoon, or was this another show he was putting on? Why'd he need to take a picture of it? There has been a renewed interest in this case as of 2022. More victims have been identified. Currently, there are approximately 10,000 bone fragments trying to be identified. The process is slow because a lot of the remains were crushed or burnt. We hope that one day all of the remains will be identified. But what do you think of this case? Have you ever heard of it before? Let us know in the comments below.